Market Success webinar part 2 on selling to schools and institutions. We have Jaycob Robinson here with Red Lake Inc. and he has preps a presentation on selling to schools and institutions. This is provided in part by Office of Tribal Relations as part of their programming, so we're very thankful for that funding. This will also be available online through our programming. Once it's been recorded, we'll post it online so that you can view it there. So very exciting. It'll be available on demand for everyone if this time doesn't work, or if you have to hop off, then hop back on. And then of course, we'll have time for questions at the end. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and sorry about the delay. We had a little bit of scheduling confusion, and as such, so I'm actually just returning from a trip from Taiwan yesterday, and I am not in my office. So what I will do is I will send my slide deck around to be included with this recording and be circulated to everyone here. But what we can do is kind of talk in general about our experience at Red Lake into selling into USDA programs and institutions. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jaycob Robinson. I'm a tribal member of the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians in northern Minnesota. I currently serve as the Chief Development Officer for Red Lake Incorporated, which is the wholly owned tribally chartered company that oversees all of the for-profit non-gaming enterprises owned by the band. We have 13 portfolio companies, 4 of which specialize in food and agricultural production, and Red Lake owned enterprises have been engaged in various commercial agricultural activities for over 35 years, and we are one of the largest global exporters of cultivated wild rice, and that's an export market development is another passion of mine and something I would absolutely love to talk with folks about at some point. But a really unique thing about the Red Lake story is that we are also the home of the Red Lake Nation fishery, which is the oldest tribally owned business in the country. It has been in continuous operation since 1907, and where it really kind of comes full circle is as a business, it started out with a federal contract to supply fish for Army and military training camps and bases nearby. So fast forward, 110 plus years later, and here we are back in the world of federal procurement and federal contracting. The Red Lake Nation fishery is unique because it is the only commercial walleye fishery in the United States of America. And it is also the only walleye fishery in the world that has a best choice sustainability rating from the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch program. So we first got approached about becoming involved with institutional solicitations and procurements back in 2019. At that point, USDA was doing a big push with the FDIPR program on the traditional foods, and we're looking for a source of fish. And we were one of the tribal producers identified as possibly being able to provide for the program. And as I mentioned, the fishery is a long-standing and fairly well-established business, which really helped on the federal procurement side. So if you're looking at doing sales to the federal government, the first thing you really need to evaluate, and this is something we talk about in various areas of business and enterprise development, is it the right opportunity for you? It is very, very attractive because people see large dollar figures being attributed to solicitations, but there is a whole lot of compliance and a whole lot of prep work and a lot of factors that go into that. And it's also at a very large scale. And that's something, even being as big as we are, being well established, kind of the scale and solicitation timeline and procurement has been something we've had to work with our contract officers on, and something that we have struggled with in the past. So as I mentioned, we first were approached about the FDIPR program in 2019, and it took us 2.5 years before we were able to do our first solicitation or fulfill our first solicitation, and close to 3 years before we were actually paid for it. So it's a long haul. And again, that's where you really have to decide and really look at your business model, really look at your capacity and decide, doing federal procurement right for your business, because it isn't right for everybody. We've also been really lucky in the sense that most solicitations within USDA do not have set-asides. Some do have tribal specific set-asides, but most do not. And our category doesn't either, but we're the only domestic producer. So there's no one else in the United States that has a commercial walleye fishery that can produce this product, and product has to come from the US. So while we don't have a sole source, we don't have a set-aside, we do not have other competitive bidders, whereas a lot of other procurement categories are going to be put out for competitive bid. So you have to be the lowest price. We're kind of stepping back onto the compliance side. As I mentioned, we were 2.5 years before actually sending a truck off to a USDA warehouse in Kansas City. And most of that time was spent on developing the draft specification. And that was another kind of unique barrier to our situation, but something that is applicable to other tribal producers who are looking to introduce a novel item into the USDA, is going through the product specification process and all the testing that's required. We had to send a bunch of samples to the FNS, Food and Nutrition Service within USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, their standards and specifications division. We had to do third-party testing, nutritional analysis, and prove that the information on our nutritional labels was in fact correct and within reasonable tolerances. And that was just to get the product specification. And then in order to be compliant, and this is an area that's unique to seafood, because USDA doesn't administer its own compliance scheme for seafood products. It relies on the Seafood Inspection Program through NOAA and the U.S. Department of Commerce. So it's third party kind of in that regard, but it is extremely rigorous. We've been an FDA licensed facility for 15, 20 years, but the Seafood Inspection Program through USDC and NOAA is very intensive, very rigorous, required a lot of plant updates. I mean, all told, just into compliance measures and plant updates to meet the Seafood Inspection Program requirements, we've made over $1 million investment over a 2.5-year timeline just to be able to respond to a solicitation. So again, it really comes down to determining if these opportunities are right for your business and what your capacities are. If you're in the early stages of kind of starting your business and commercializing your products, that's great because you can kind of build these goals, build these timelines, and build these compliance schemes into your business model and into your business planning and into your growth plans. If you're an established business, that's also great, and there's still a lot of opportunity to work with USDA. But you have to likely revisit a lot of your production practices, a lot of your record keeping, and a lot of the requirements that are necessitated by the USDA. Another big initial hurdle for us was having to have audited financials, and that is something that we do as a regular course of business. Just kind of the way the timing of solicitations came up and our audit schedule, we had to advance an audit, and just to be able to register as a vendor within the USDA, we had to complete a $30,000 audit of our year-to-date financials for that point, and we have to keep on those audits. They've since gotten a little bit less expensive, but we still plan on about $20,000 of audit costs per year just to be compliant with the USDA vendor program. So it is financially cumbersome, and it is, it's a lot of work. We had to create several staff positions just to maintain compliance. There's a lot more daily record keeping. There's a lot of product batching. We have to go through mock recall protocols to remain compliant with the Seafood Inspection Program. And I'm not sure, I can't speak to beef. I can't speak to commodities. I can't speak to grains because those are typically compliance and regulatory programs administered within USDA itself, which probably streamlines it a little bit. But on the seafood side, it is burdensome. It is complex, it is complicated, but it also provided an excellent learning opportunity for us. We were able to update our plant in ways that needed to be updated. We were able to improve our processes, improve our data collection, improve our reporting, and improve our product flow and our analytics as a result of it. So it wasn't, a totally sunk cost, and it made us a better enterprise as a result. Um, so that's a little bit about just kind of the compliance, and the vendor component for us to be ready to participate in these programs. And we've been really fortunate to work with great teams within USDA, within commodities procurement. USDA now has staff who's, in their job description, walleye is part of it, which is really neat to see. And they've been great. They've been forthcoming. They've been fantastic to work with, but we've certainly hit hurdles. As I mentioned earlier, the scale, and kind of the demand, by which the USDA requires product is large. I mean, it's truckload quantities, and for us, it's multi-truckloads within a solicitation. So most of our solicitations, they happen in 36,000 pound batches, but we'll get, solicitations for 148,000 pounds of fillets, which that's usually a 3 to 4 month production timeline for us, but we have to meet their delivery deadlines. So kind of working through that and navigating through that was difficult at first. And fortunately, the team over in commodities procurement was willing to work with us on, okay, what's a more stable schedule for producing and procuring this product, and we've largely been able to smooth those things out. But another kind of barrier, and another issue, if you will, is they'll issue a solicitation in October for delivery in February and March, and we're a wild caught, wild harvested product that's produced daily, and at the whims of weather a lot of time, as most farming and a lot of agriculture is. And we don't run on excess inventory. Typically the things we're sending out in truckload quantities have all been harvested, within 30 or 60 days and produced. We don't keep a huge backlog of inventory. So we do run into occasional issues with weather. We had a very, very poor ice season, very, very poor winter fishing season. And as a result, we had to delay shipment on a couple of our loads on our last procurement. And there are times penalties associated. You do, especially in a competitive bid environment, you do risk losing vendor status, or just not having your bids picked up if you've not met production timelines or delivery timelines in the past. But typically we found, by being really open with our contract officers, by being forthcoming and letting them know what's going on and getting ahead of any problems that we potentially see, that they've been really receptive and been great to work with. So that's just a real brief overview on kind of our commodity solicitation program. It's been an absolute game changer for our business, just because it provides a really, really stable market for us, and also a differentiated market. Before our program at the USDA began, we were very, very tied to foreign companies' prices. Canada's a huge producer of walleye. At one point, the market tanked, where they were selling fillets at wholesale prices of less than $6. It costs us $8 to $9 just to produce a pound of fillet, and that was before all the compliance updates and packaging updates and all that stuff. So for a long time, we were tied to foreign producers' prices, and in order to maintain our market, when those prices dipped, so did we. But by being able to have this market with the USDA, we have pricing resiliency because we have offtake. We have offtake at a preferential price, and it has to be within reason. Like, we can't just say we're going to sell for $45 a pound and they're just going to automatically pay it no matter what. Like, it has to fit within their budget. It has to be within a reasonable margin of other seafood products, even though there's no other producers and no other direct replacements within our category. But it's been an absolute game changer for our business, and it's been very, very worthwhile for the Red Lake Nation fishery. But the Red Lake Nation fishery also has the advantage of being more of an enterprise scale, where we have corporate backing through Red Lake Inc. We have the ability to accrue debt, and create leverage to those things, which we had to do to implement some of these big plant changes. As I mentioned, we invested in over 7 figures just to be a part of this program. Our return on investment on that is between 3.5 and 4.25 years just to recoup the money that we've put into that. And we're about halfway through that payback period on that. So it really is about identifying the right opportunities and right sizing your business for what you want to do with the federal government. And it also is largely dependent on, are you a producer of a commodity that the USDA is already procuring? Are you hoping to introduce a novel product and be part of something like the traditional foods program, or some of like the food basket programs have smaller solicitations and are more reasonable? Are you looking at doing 638 contracting? And that's been a game changer, especially for smaller producers. Is the 638 pilot program. We've supplied some tribes that are a part of that pilot with both wild rice, cultivated wild rice, and walleye fillets. But that can be a really good way to at least start working with USDA programs and building your capacity within your business with an eye on doing large solicitations for a program like FDIPR. And that's also like, for us, having the nationwide distributions is absolutely vital. This is, an extremely labor intensive, extremely cash intensive process to be a part of these programs. So it's only worth it when we're having large scale solicitations multi times per year in order to even meet our payback and for it to be worthwhile to maintain these compliance costs. We're inspected quarterly by the Seafood Inspection Program. Every time they come out, it's $30,000. So, we're $120,000 a year just into quarterly inspections to be compliant with USDA's requirements. And again, that's going to vary a lot. I think that the seafood inspection program being administered by a separate agency makes it a little bit more cumbersome. And that is something we would like to work with USDA on in the future, is creating alternative pathways for things like FDA certification and registration to be acknowledged. Because again, if you're a company like Trident Seafoods that are doing these, selling tens of millions of dollars of salmon fillets into the USDA per year, yeah, $120,000 is a pretty minimal cost. For us, and we're a fairly large tribal producer, it's a noticeable cost, but it is something that we're able to absorb, something we're able to price in. But we had to go through 2 inspections before we were able to do a solicitation. So that was, again, more capital that we had to put up and some expenses we just had to eat to be compliant with the program. It is possible to get waivers on certain solicitation requirements if those are temporary. So if if they have 8 solicitation requirements and you meet 6 of them and you're making progress on the last 2, we found our partners at USDA have been very, very open and amenable to granting temporary or one-time waivers in order to make a purchase happen. But you can't necessarily count on that, especially if you're in a competitive bid category. And that does kind of change things pretty quick. Another good option to look at is if you are in a category, that the USDA is already procuring products within, and there are companies servicing that, look at being a provider for them. If you are still looking at scaling up or building the necessary corporate or company infrastructure to meet the compliance requirements and meet the audit requirements and everything that goes with federal contracting, you can look at partnering with someone who's already fulfilling solicitations and providing raw ingredients, providing product into their business. And that can also be kind of a good way to start, and something that we have explored in the past. And we've also had people approach us about. It's not anything that we've acted on or are actively engaged or pursuing, but it is definitely a route and definitely a pathway to consider. USDA just recently has issued an intent to bid on walleye for school programs. And that's something we're looking at their product specification requirements and seeing if it's a good fit for us. Because again, it would be a different packaging and a different product spec than we're currently producing for. And those things, like they take time and they take quite a bit of money to change, to produce, just to change case sizes. For example, if we're going to go from 11-pound cases, which is industry standard, to 40, we had to design a whole new box, bring on a graphic design team that met all the labeling requirements, like right down to the font size and where it's located on the box, to be compliant for the USDA. And that was, boy, $45,000 endeavor. And that included our first couple of orders of boxes as well. But just being very open, being very honest about the capital commitments that are required for participating in these programs is something you need to keep on the forefront of your mind. And it's also conversations that need to be had within IAC and within USDA of, okay, how can we break down some of these barriers for tribal producers, or how can we create scalable pathways for producers to start producing for USDA and be able to grow and scale their businesses to meet the model that the Department of Agriculture already has. Yeah, so that was kind of the gist of my presentation. I'm happy to kind of send the slides along. Hope I didn't ramble too poorly, but I would absolutely love to answer any questions if people have them. If there's any specifics that people want to know about the process we went through, our goals, kind of how the program has evolved and progressed with us, I'm happy to answer them. The other thing too is that there's always risk. There's always risk that the USDA will no longer, that they'll limit solicitations, or, potentially, discontinue the traditional foods program, or, these things that are heavily budget dependent. And we feel that, our risk is pretty well mitigated, that there has been great feedback and great demand for our products. But it is something that, as if you're a producer, you're a business person, you understand risk, you understand that the market is an always evolving and ever changing place. And one thing we've had to really be cognizant of is not becoming too reliant on the USDA. I mean, it's been great for our business. It's been an absolute game changer for the Red Lake Nation fishery. It's been an absolute game changer for the Red Lake Nation. The quality of jobs that we're able to provide, the number of jobs that we're able to provide, and its direct community impact. But we've had to really make sure that we're keeping a diversified market, that we're not 100% reliant on the USDA. So if something crazy ever happens, and they either limit the amount of solicitations or don't solicit product for a quarter or 2 quarters or a year, that we're still a viable business and have other areas that we can divert product into.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all great information, and we'll be sure and send the slide deck out to all of the participants. Once we receive it, we'll just send it out to everyone registered. So that'll include some people who weren't able to make it. So that's awesome. Feel free to send all of your questions in the chat. And we will ask them to Jaycob. In the meantime, I have some questions that we sourced from our team. I know you said that walleye is, oh, here we go, from Christina. Are you selling directly to schools too? If so, what has that process been like?
So we've not sold directly to schools. The USDA has just issued an intent to bid on walleye for the school lunch program. So again, that would be selling into a USDA program rather than selling directly to schools. We did we did look at selling into schools, and again, kind of depending on what your product is, usually the best way is, if you have a local school district that has interest in your products, or is interested in bringing them in, is to work with the food service provider, like Sodexo or Cisco or Performance Food Group, whoever whoever is providing the school with the food that they order is getting your products listed for them or through them, so that then an individual school or a small group of schools can just utilize their own budget to bring your products in. But no, we haven't done any through USDA. We haven't done any direct to school sales, but we are looking at the school lunch program.
Awesome. And I know you said that walleye, you guys are the sole producers of walleye in America. And do you have advice for other people who are, trying to break into selling novel products like that, that there's not a lot of, and our producers might specialize in as indigenous producers?
Yeah, yep, and that's where having the traditional foods program within FDIPR and USDA is absolutely vital. And I guess what I would likely recommend is to work with whoever your regional FDIPR representative is, because there's a board that advises FDIPR, and that board has been a great resource for us in terms of advocating for the product, in terms of making sure there's sufficient demand, and in terms of scaling the demand for the product. So having a conversation with whoever kind of represents your region, or just board members in general. And I believe that the FDIPR board usually meets at the IAC conference. I think that's true, but definitely double check that. And that's another great opportunity. We've been able to interface a lot with folks from USDA, folks from the FDIPR board, and folks just within Indian Ag at the IAC conference every year. It's been phenomenal for us, and that's, oh boy, in 2021, I want to say, we were, having some specification issues, and we're able to just talk directly with the product specifications team within USDA at IAC, and interface directly with them and kind of get things figured out about what we needed to do, or about some minor changes that needed to be made within the draft spec. So definitely utilize IAC as a resource, utilize IAC's network as a resource, utilize the FDIPR board to kind of build advocacy for that product. If you're looking to do a type of wild harvested jam or wild harvested jelly or something like that, showing that you can be at scale, and possibly even working within 638. And that's another great way to kind of get sort of the past performance and just kind of get the ground beneath your feet, so to speak, is to work with 638, work with a tribal organization that's a part of that, because the solicitations are smaller, the requirements are a little less onerous, and it's a great way to get started with realizing dollars from the USDA.
Yeah, wonderful. And another thing that you mentioned that was interesting was you said it was a big advantage to have a structure that allows you to accrue debt. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on that, and why that's specifically beneficial, and how that's been beneficial to you guys and allowing you to leverage things. I mean, just expand on that statement a little bit more.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that was kind of category specific, because again, we've been an FDA registered plant, and compliant plant for 20 years. And then USDC and NOAA has an entirely different set of requirements. So everything that was sufficient within the FDA compliance scheme was not sufficient within the NOAA compliance scheme. So, and our plant was old. And there was a lot of upgrades that needed to happen. But I mean, all told, between plant updates, compliance software tracking, all these things, like we had to invest around $1.4 million into making sure we had a compliant plant, and all the necessary infrastructure. We use Parity Factory. It's a food manufacturing tracking software to create batches, to create lots that are traceable. Lot traceability is a big component within USDA in case there's ever a recall issue. But that was an $80,000 implementation. So having the ability to leverage debt, through either collateralizing the assets of the Red Lake Nation fishery, or because of the corporate structure of Red Lake Inc., how we have this kind of this umbrella umbrella structure, we're able to collateralize assets within our whole corporate infrastructure to allow for short-term debt. But having access to capital is always a struggle within Indian country and tribal producers. But it is something, if you're looking at realistically pursuing selling into USDA, you have to be very honest and very realistic about what it's going to cost, because there is going to be a cost, unless you're already running a plant that has all the necessary certifications and all that. You likely are going to have to retool some aspects of your production and track data and collate things in a way that you haven't before. There are going to be additional steps required. So you just have to be very, very honest and truthful about, okay, what are the actual costs that's going to be? What's the ROI on this? And is this a good fit for your business?
Wonderful, thank you. We have two more questions from Narissa. We'll start with the first one is, did you start out knowing how to navigate all of this, or how did you get help figuring out all of the red tape?
I started out knowing how to navigate none of this. That was a huge, huge, huge learning curve. And something like one of the most arduous processes was actually the USDA vendor registration component. And that's where we ran into the audit thing. And it was just, and again, I'm an English major from a liberal arts school. I don't have a technical background. I don't have, I was the general manager of the fishery at the time, kind of running the plant and the marketing side of things. And then all of a sudden I'm dealing with like this government compliance stuff and this vendor registration thing. And we met with a tribal enterprise. They're a large, well-known, very capable, very, very quality producer in Alaska. And I was talking to one of their folks, and they have a whole team of folks, and they were saying like, yeah, we can't get this vendor thing figured out. Like, how'd you do that? And I didn't have a good answer because it was kind of like a fever dream. It was just like this brick wall I kept bashing my head into, and asking questions. I used that helpline a lot. I'm pretty sure they were screening my calls by the end of it. But not being afraid to ask questions, and just really digging into it and having a lot of very boring hours scrolling through FARs, federal acquisition regulations, and learning what a FAR was, learning how to look up a FAR. Yeah, there was a huge, huge learning curve there. But trust me, if I can do it, so can you. um, but yeah, it's definitely not something that I had knowledge of beforehand. It's something I've become woefully proficient at since then, and always enjoy sharing our experience and helping other producers out and learning how to overcome some of these barriers.
Yeah, I think that's always the key whenever you're dealing with a lot of federal regulations, is like how much boring federal regulation stuff can you read through. Um, it's really like a test of grit. Sometimes it feels like. We have another
Yeah.
question. It's, do you have any suggestions on scaling? Again from Narissa. We are growing the Four Corners potatoes, and scaling that to the next level is our challenge.
Yeah, so growing a business and growing a business correctly is, in my mind, the most difficult thing. And the the way I liken it is it's very much a chicken or the egg scenario, and eventually you have to force an egg. Eventually, like, because a lot of times, and especially with the lack of access in Indian country and for tribal producers to capital, it's really hard to scale without a market. It's really hard to get a market without scale. So eventually, there's just an element of risk. You have to do a comprehensive market analysis. You have to identify, your demand centers. You have to identify and be honest about what your break-even costs are, and be realistic about what your expectations for your business are. Is this sort of a side hustle? Is this something that where you're buying yourself a job, so to speak, like a smaller, medium-sized enterprise? Do you want to become the next Ore Potato? Uh, how big do you want to be, and what are your realistic expectations for? Excuse me. picture going off in the background. And that really informs what your scale is going to be, and that informs how you're going to achieve that scale. So I would say just conducting a comprehensive market analysis, but also a capacity analysis. What kind of scale can you handle with your current means of production? Do you have rooms where you can improve your efficiency or your yield? For some lower hanging steps towards scale. How much more business can you handle, or how much more capacity can you handle before you need to grow, before you need to buy more land, or you need to invest in more equipment or bring on more labor? And what does that look like, and how does that impact your bottom line? So an in-depth market analysis, then an in-depth capacity analysis. You're muted, Lara.
Thank you. I do that at least once a day. It's incredibly embarrassing. Well, thank you so much, Jake, for all of those answers. Do we have any more questions? Jake can answer. He provides great answers to all the questions, honestly.
Well, I super appreciate everyone's time and listen to me drone on about federal regulations. I see we got a question from Buck Jones. Yeah, so the Red Lake Nation fishery is unique because the lake is owned by the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians, and only tribal members can fish on that lake. So all of the fish harvested is harvested directly by tribal members. But that's kind of a unique position, but it is an entirely tribally sourced product. The enterprise is owned in whole by the Red Lake Band. So it is very uniquely tribal.
Would you like to share your contact information so people can follow up if they have any questions?
Sure, I'll drop it in the chat here. Oh, no, sorry, I sent that right to Lara. Yeah, and absolutely. We're love showing people the plant. I think it's a pretty cool outfit. We've been able, as part of meeting these compliance requirements, we've done a ton of really cool updates, and it's a production plant that's really neat to see. And it's got, the enterprise has such a unique history and such a unique story within the Red Lake Nation, that it's something we're really proud of and love showing off.
That's awesome. You've got me wanting to come up there too.
Yeah, come on up anytime.
Buck and I can road trip.
There we go.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, Jake, thank you so much for your time. And we will get the slides sent out to everyone. And have a great rest of your day.
Perfect. Thank you.